Hello. Just so you're aware, I tried to figure out how to readjust the camera. I am not the worst with technology, but I'm also not the best because I know my limits, and that is one of them. So, the first step, first ever for every single fact pattern you have, no matter what, is you're going to apply the E, which is where, right? Where? Do we have jurisdiction? Well, let's see. Did they file a suit, first of all? The answer is yes. All right, I guess we'll get to step one. It's probably not going to be so easy as that they never filed a suit in the first place. You could say, no suit, don't have to do anything. So, where? There's two things to look at, okay? First, you have to look at what's called subject matter jurisdiction, and then you have personal jurisdiction. Personal jurisdiction is a heck of a lot easier always than subject matter jurisdiction because most of the time when there is personal jurisdiction, it's typically what's called in persona, which typically means that it has to be with the person. So, that person is domiciled there, okay? Or they have a residence there, or it's a legal entity and they have a principal place of business there, they're incorporated there, or something like that. They have jurisdiction over the person. And when I mean they, I mean the court. They can exercise their power over this person. Now, typically, you're going to want to have domicile over residence when it comes to the person. Excuse me, learning is an allergy for me. Okay, so in personam is the easiest, okay? When it comes to domicile, it's a little bit more than just residence. Residence is where you live. Domicile, think, this is where I live, I intend to stay, I have a license here, I have my car insurance here, I have a mailing address here, I also reside here, right? If you have all those things, then there's probably personal jurisdiction, you're fine, that's the easiest one. And then there is obviously the very common secondary personal jurisdiction, which is known as in rem. That's where you have jurisdiction over a property because it is in that state. So that's pretty easy. Anytime you buy a piece of land or a home that's built on a foundation in a specific state, that state will always have personal jurisdiction over that property. Why? Because it's part of their state. So pretty simple there. You have what's called quasi and rem jurisdiction. Typically doesn't come up, but what that is when somebody tries to sue another person and they're trying to get jurisdiction over this person somehow. And so what they'll try and do is they'll try to implicate their property somehow in some type of litigation. And if that person wants to defend their property, they have to go to court to do so. And that would avail them to some other type of personal jurisdiction. Sometimes they do it to try to sneakily, serve them papers or something else. There are other rules about that, but this is complex, so we don't have to get too deep into ZivPro, but that's the gist of it, okay? So the most common you're going to have is in persona. Now, what if there is maybe personal jurisdiction or it's kind of not clear-cut, because that can happen, specifically with a legal entity. Then you have to do a test known as the International Shoe Test. I know those that love civil procedure are just like, yay! So International Shoe Test says, let's count contacts. And that's pretty much looking at, okay, would this person have expected to be brought into court here? Do they have a good amount of relationships in this state because of family relationships, work relationships? Are they a company and they're selling people things in this state? Are they involving themselves in interstate commerce? Are they advertising to this state? Do they fly to this state frequently for vacation? Think of it like this. When you're looking at contact with the state, does that person ever associate with that state for any reason at all? And they just count in what ways, and then I'll tell you what the minimum contacts are. Now, somebody can have a lot of minimum contact or even a substantial amount of contacts in a state past the shoe test, but still not, they will still not exercise power or authority over that person if it failed the Goodyear tires test. There are lots of tests. I think the original was SIE test, but I put Goodyear tires because that's actually a case relevant to conflicts. That's a case that occurred when there was unfortunately an accident in France and people obviously did not do well, and so they sued Goodyear tires. And the thing that you have to remember is, even if you have minimum contacts, you have to remember ask, like, okay, would I have expected to be sued here based on my other conduct? Even if the answer is yes, even if it's a baby, yeah, you should have known. Technically, we may not sue them or allow them to continue the suit if it breaches what's known as the fair play and substantial justice rule. Just because you could potentially be sued anywhere doesn't mean the court will allow that. And the reason why is it's just not fair. Why would we allow you to sue just anybody in this state or anybody in this country or anybody in another country just because they may have potentially had some type of small minimum contact that could technically connect or link them to the state? We want something substantial enough to connect them to the state. Otherwise, it's just not fair, right? So that's how that works for these two things. And now you also have subject matter jurisdiction. I'll get to that now because that's my favorite. So diversity is the easiest portion of this. Now diversity really is if you have two people from different states, they're domiciled in different states, but something happens. Contract dispute, car accident, that's typically what it is. So let's just say it's a car accident between somebody in California and someone in Nevada, okay? Now, we're gonna sue in federal court because we're from different states and I'm suing for $300,000. If you are suing for over $75,000 and you are diverse citizens of different states, you can sue in federal court. Now, why does it have to be above $75,000? Because you have to pass what is the amount of controversy, so, and that's the threshold of $75,000. Every few decades they raise that. Hasn't been raised in a while. It really ought to be, but you know they don't ask me these things. Now, if it's not that, then you might have federal question. A federal question typically is exactly how it sounds, doesn't involve a federal question, a question of federal law. Most commonly, this is going to be something like, you know, freedom of speech, right? It's typically a high threshold. Is this a federal issue? So federal issues are typically constitutional related, or if there's a federal regulation, maybe there's a treaty or something like that. Or there could be, you know, federal workers' comp claim. There's a lot of reasons why. And like another thing too is like if there's a suit between negligence of an employer, but this person works for the government, most likely most things are going to be government law. So if it's a government law that's federal law as opposed to government law that's state law, it's going to be a federal question. Now, if you have any type of federal question, you can usually just get into federal court just like that. It's a lot easier. But you have to make sure that your claim is substantially or solely based on federal question. If it only has, say there's two issues and the major issue is a state law issue and there's like a little baby like issue about federal question, then that's not enough to satisfy the threshold to get into federal court, because the whole point of this limitation is we do want to limit the actual cases in federal court, and we are only going to have cases in federal court if there's subject matter jurisdiction. So do we have the authority as a federal court to exercise our power over these parties based on the subject, the topic of their problem? If the answer is no, then they're going to have to go to state court. And if the answer is yes, is it because of subject matter jurisdiction or diversity jurisdiction, or is it because of both? If you can't satisfy either of those, then you can't be in federal court. So that's about it for the step one, or E for Eaton.